There's no danger I would not bring Roy Keane into the club. Like I say, it was a bit detrimental to me because then Ince and Keane sort of got into the midfield most of the time, but every now and again, if they were suspended or injured.
Brian Robson named his 4 toughest football opponents. But here's the shocking truth. This isn't just about rival players. It's about a clash that exposed the very soul of Manchester United. Brian Robson was the ultimate English captain. He was Captain Marvel, the beating heart of Manchester United for over a decade. The man Sir Alex Ferguson called the best captain he ever had. Better than Roy Keane, better than Eric Cantona, better than all of them. He was the complete midfielder. Strong, tireless, brave beyond reason. He played 461 games for United, scored 99 goals, won 90 caps for England. He was so brave that his body broke down from it. 3 broken legs, a broken collarbone, endless injuries. But none of that stopped him. He lifted the very first Premier League trophy for Manchester United in 1993, the captain who finally ended the 26-year wait. But this legendary captain is caught in a major conflict. When Brian Robson named his toughest opponents, the names weren't the shocking part. The shocking part was the hypocrisy it revealed. This story isn't just about his rivals. It's about a bitter war that exposes the old-school code as nothing but a lie. The feud started with Roy Keane. Keane was Robson's successor at United, the next hard man, the next captain. But in 2014, Keane released a book called The Second Half, and in that book, he went after Sir Alex Ferguson. He didn't hold back. He criticised the manager he once played for, and Brian Robson, now a club ambassador, couldn't stay quiet. Robson came out swinging. He said Keane was only being controversial to sell more books and make more money. He said autobiographies should be about memories, about great times, not about airing dirty laundry. He was playing the loyal traditionalist, the man defending the club's honour. But Roy Keane fired back with a brutal truth. He called the whole culture at United a mafia situation. He said the club was like Disneyland, Man United Land, with Mickey Mouse running everywhere. And he said Robson's opinion didn't count. Why? Because Robson was employed by Manchester United. His loyalty wasn't to honour, it was to the paycheck. This feud reveals everything. Robson's loyalty isn't to a code, it's to the institution that pays him. He attacked Keane for writing a book, for using words. But look at the men Robson actually respects, the men he praises, the men he calls his toughest opponents, and you'll see the hypocrisy. So who was right? Was Keane telling the truth about the United Mafia? Or was Robson right to defend the club's legacy? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into football's biggest feuds, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's look at the rivals Robson praises. His greatest rival was Graeme Souness, Liverpool's hard man. Their battles were legendary. 2 titans in the midfield, the heart of the war between United and Liverpool in the 1980s. But Robson respects Souness. Why? Because Souness played by his rules. Souness himself said Robson was extremely honest, never took a cheap shot. Robson said they never got into a war. They fought hard, but they fought fair. There's a famous story from the 1983 Charity Shield. United was leading 2-0. Robson broke through on goal. Souness brought him down from behind. A clear professional foul. The referee reached for his pocket to send Souness off, but Robson stopped him. He asked the referee not to send Souness off. Why? Because he had enjoyed a good contest. He wanted to keep fighting. This sounds noble, but think about it. Robson respects Souness because Souness played by his rules. Souness called Robson his worst nightmare. Robson loves this rivalry because it makes him look good. It reinforces his own image. He respects Souness's on-field aggression, but he attacks Keane for off-field honesty. It shows Robson's code is selective. It only applies when it suits him. Now look at his next rival. When asked to name the single hardest opponent he ever faced, Robson always names Jimmy Case, another Liverpool midfielder. But listen to how Robson describes him. He is careful to say, I won't say he was dirty. Instead, he admires Case. He says Case could certainly look after himself, and was very clever about it as well. Clever about it, that's the key. Robson doesn't respect honesty. He respects intelligent aggression. He respects the craft of getting away with a foul. Jimmy Case learned his trade playing for a Dockers club, facing grown men as a teenager. He lived by a simple rule: if you hold back, you're the one who will get hurt. That's the world Robson really respects. Not honour, not honesty, clever brutality. So Robson admires a player for being clever with his aggression. But he condemns Roy Keane for being controversial with his words. This makes his criticism of Keane look even more two-faced. The hypocrisy is stunning. The final piece of the puzzle is Tommy Smith, another Liverpool legend. Robson tells a story from his younger days at West Bromwich Albion. He admitted to going late on Smith, going in with a hard tackle. The result was predictable. For the next 15 minutes, Smith absolutely cemented him, hit him hard at every chance. Payback. And here's the thing, Robson tells this story with no complaint. He accepted it as a lesson. This incident proves Robson's real code. You can break the rules, you can go in late, as long as you're willing to accept the violent retribution that follows. So why didn't he apply this code to Roy Keane? In Robson's world, Keane went late on Ferguson with his words. The book was the retribution. But Robson didn't accept it. He didn't respect it as part of the game. Instead, he complained about money. He defended the Disneyland image of the club. He proved Keane's point. He's no longer the tough captain. He's just a company man, a puppet for the mafia. When you look deeper into this pattern, something becomes crystal clear. Robson's entire worldview was built on a foundation of physical dominance and unspoken agreements between warriors on the pitch. He came from an era where footballers settled their disputes with tackles, where respect was earned through blood and sweat, and where the code of silence about what happened in the dressing room was sacred. This wasn't just about football for Robson. It was about a way of life, a culture, a belief system that governed how men should behave. And in that world, there was no room for someone like Roy Keane, who took the battle off the pitch and into the public arena. Robson saw this as a betrayal of everything he stood for. But was it really about betrayal, or was it about something more personal? When you examine the specific criticisms Robson levelled at Keane, they all circle back to one central theme: money. He accused Keane of being controversial just to sell books. He questioned why someone who had already made a great living from football needed to make more by attacking the institution that gave him everything. This obsession with money reveals something about Robson's own insecurities. Here was a man who had sacrificed his body for Manchester United, who had played through injuries that would have ended other careers, who had given everything to the club and received loyalty in return through his ambassadorial role. And now here was Keane, suggesting that this loyalty was bought and paid for, that the ambassadors and legends who defended the club weren't speaking from the heart, but from the wallet. This cut Robson deep because on some level he knew it was true. His position at United wasn't just an honorary title, it was a job, and jobs come with expectations. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't criticise the manager who made you famous. You don't expose the inner workings of the club to the public. These were the unwritten rules of Robson's generation, and Keane was breaking every single one of them. But the deeper you dig into this conflict, the more you realise it's not really about money or loyalty or even honour. It's about power. Specifically, it's about who gets to control the narrative of Manchester United's history. Robson and his generation believed they had earned the right to shape that story. They were the ones who lived it, who suffered for it, who built the foundation upon which the modern success was constructed. And they wanted that story told their way, a way that emphasised unity, sacrifice, and collective glory. Keane represented a different approach. He believed that the truth, however uncomfortable, was more important than maintaining a comfortable fiction. He believed that the players who came after him deserved to know what really happened behind the scenes, the conflicts, the betrayals, the human drama that was sanitised out of the official history. In Keane's view, the old guard's obsession with protecting the club's image was actually doing more harm than good. It was creating a culture where honest criticism was seen as disloyalty, where questioning authority was treated as treason, where speaking your mind could get you cast out of the family forever. This was the mafia mentality Keane was fighting against, and Robson, whether he realised it or not, was one of its enforcers. The irony is that Robson's reaction to Keane's book proved Keane's entire point, by publicly attacking Keane for his honesty, by accusing him of mercenary motives, by suggesting that former players should only write glowing tributes to the club that employed them. Robson demonstrated exactly the kind of institutional control that Keane was criticising. He showed that there was indeed an expectation of loyalty that went beyond what happened on the pitch, an expectation that former players would protect the club's interests even at the expense of their own truth. And the punishment for violating this expectation was public shaming and exile from the inner circle. This brings us back to the question of hypocrisy. Is it hypocritical for Robson to celebrate the physical enforcers of his playing days while condemning the verbal enforcer of his retirement? The answer is yes, but it's a hypocrisy born of a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world has changed. In Robson's era, the battles were fought on the pitch and stayed there. What happened in the dressing room stayed in the dressing room. The media was largely kept at arm's length. Players had privacy. Careers could be managed without constant public scrutiny. But Keane came of age in a different world, a world of 24-hour sports media, where every comment was analysed, where silence was interpreted as weakness, where controlling your own narrative meant being willing to tell your own story before someone else told it for you. In this new world, the old code of silence wasn't just outdated, it was dangerous. It left players vulnerable to having their stories twisted or erased entirely. Keane understood this. Robson didn't. And that fundamental disconnect is what turned two Manchester United legends into bitter enemies, fighting for their version of history. The feud with Keane isn't just personal, it's a collision of eras. Robson is the old-school captain, the man who believes in public unity, in keeping secrets, in loyalty to the institution. Keane is the modern player, the man who values outspoken honesty above all else, who sees through the corporate image and refuses to play along with it. By attacking Keane, Robson revealed his own legacy, but not in the way he intended. He showed his code was selective, that he would protect the mafia that employed him, that his respect for Souness, his admiration for Case, and the lesson he learned from Smith all pointed to one thing. He valued physical toughness on the field, but he couldn't handle the truth of it. The contradiction in his character became impossible to ignore once the spotlight shifted from the pitch to the boardroom. But to only focus on this feud is to forget the man he was. He was Captain Marvel for a reason. He was the heart and engine of Manchester United, the bridge between two eras at the club. He was so committed that his body was a litany of serious injuries, too brave for his own good. His 461 games, his 99 goals, his 90 England caps. These are the facts. And it was just and fitting that after a 26-year wait, the man who lifted the very first Premier League trophy for Manchester United was Brian Robson. Ultimately, Robson's character was forged in a different time. His respect for Souness, his admiration for Case, and the lesson he learned from Smith all point to a man who mastered the brutal code of his era. While his clash with Roy Keane shows a man out of step with the modern world, it doesn't erase the warrior who came before. He was, and always will be, a true icon of English football. But what do you think? Is Robson a hypocrite for attacking Keane, or was he right to defend the old-school code? Let us know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and if you want more stories about football's biggest legends, hit that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one. He can't play at all. Those words might surprise you when we talk about Jack Charlton, a man who won the World Cup with England in 1966 and became Ireland's favourite Englishman. But behind the legendary status and the cheering crowds, Jack Charlton lived a life marked by bitter conflicts that lasted decades. When he died in July 2020 after battling lymphoma and dementia, two nations mourned him. But the story of his life wasn't just about glory on the pitch. It was about feuds that tore apart families, destroyed friendships, and divided an entire country over how football should be played. Jack Charlton was born on May 8, 1935, in Ashington, a small mining town in Northumberland. He spent his entire playing career at Leeds United, making 629 league appearances over 21 years. He won the World Cup alongside his younger brother Bobby in 1966, a moment that should have bonded them forever. Instead, it became just one chapter in a story of division that would haunt both brothers until their final days. After retiring in 1973, Jack moved into management. In 1986, he took on his biggest challenge yet. He became the first foreign manager of the Republic of Ireland national team. The Irish had talent, but no results. Jack changed that overnight. He didn't care about playing beautiful football, he wanted wins, and he got them. Under his leadership, Ireland qualified for Euro 1988, reached the quarter-finals of the 1990 World Cup, and made it to the 1994 World Cup too. The Irish people loved him. They gave him the freedom of the city of Dublin and even granted him honorary Irish citizenship. Shopkeepers refused to cash his personal cheques because they wanted to keep them as souvenirs. He was a hero to millions. But away from the adoring crowds, Jack Charlton was fighting battles on multiple fronts. His brother wouldn't speak to him. His best players hated his methods. Critics called his football ugly and said he was wasting talented players. And one of Ireland's brightest stars publicly challenged his authority and called him a bully. Before we dive deeper into these shocking feuds, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about Jack Charlton. Was he a hero who got results, or did his conflicts show a darker side? Let us know your thoughts. The feud with his brother Bobby started long before anyone knew about it. Bobby Charlton married a woman named Norma in 1961. Norma was a strong character, and she didn't get along with their mother, Cissy Charlton. This created a terrible situation for Bobby. He loved his mother, but he loved his wife more. Bobby had to choose between them, and he chose Norma. That choice meant Bobby stopped visiting his mother. For Jack, who stayed close to his roots in Ashington, this was unforgivable. The brothers played together for England and won the World Cup together in 1966. They stood side by side as national heroes, but behind the scenes, they barely spoke. Bobby played beautiful, attacking football for Manchester United. Jack played tough defensive football for Leeds United. Their styles on the pitch mirrored their personalities off it. These differences might have been manageable, but the family split made everything worse. For over 30 years, the feud simmered quietly. Then, in 1996, their mother Cissy died. Jack had just resigned as Ireland's manager, and he was devastated by his mother's death. In his grief and anger, Jack did something that made headlines around the world. He publicly accused Bobby of neglecting their mother during her final years. He said Bobby had abandoned her and left her heartbroken. The accusation was brutal and very public. Bobby stayed silent for years, but in 2007, he finally responded in his autobiography. Bobby was furious at what Jack had said about Norma. He called Jack's claims about his wife absolutely disgraceful and complete nonsense. Bobby admitted that he and Jack had never been further apart than they were at that moment. He went even further, saying he just didn't want to know his brother anymore. These weren't private thoughts shared in confidence. These were published words that the whole world could read. Two World Cup winners, two brothers who had shared one of football's greatest moments, were now enemies. The public watched in sadness as the Charlton brothers continued their war of words. Bobby defended his choice to prioritise his wife. Jack felt Bobby had turned his back on their mother and their working-class roots. Neither would back down. Neither would apologise. The feud seemed permanent and beyond repair. But something changed in later years. Age and reflection softened both men slightly. They began to have limited contact again. The most emotional moment came at the BBC Sports Personality of the Year Awards. Jack stood on stage, clearly moved, to present Bobby with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Jack said something simple but powerful. He said, "Bobby Charlton is the greatest player I've ever seen, and he's my brother." The two men embraced, and the audience erupted in applause. It was a brief moment of healing in a relationship that had been broken for decades. In 2018, they came together again for a sad occasion. They attended the funeral of Ray Wilson, another member of England's 1966 World Cup winning team. It seemed like the brothers might finally find peace with each other, but time was running out for both of them. Jack died in July 2020. He had been suffering from both lymphoma and dementia. Just 4 months after Jack's death, Bobby received the same devastating diagnosis. He too had dementia. Bobby's health had deteriorated so much that he couldn't even attend Jack's funeral. The disease that would eventually claim Bobby had already made him too weak to say goodbye to his brother. Both men, heroes of 1966, were struck down by the same cruel illness. It was a tragic ending to a complicated relationship that had brought both brothers so much pain. The feud with Bobby was personal and private for many years, but Jack's conflicts in Ireland were very public and very loud. When he became Ireland's manager in 1986, he brought a simple philosophy: get the ball forward quickly, win headers, pressure the other team, don't worry about looking pretty, just win games. This approach worked brilliantly in terms of results. Ireland qualified for major tournaments for the first time in their history, but not everyone was happy. Eamon Dunphy was a football pundit working for Irish television. He had been a professional player himself and understood the game deeply. Dunphy watched Jack's Ireland team and hated what he saw. Along with fellow pundit Johnny Giles, Dunphy argued that Jack was wasting a golden generation of Irish talent. Players like Roy Keane, Paul McGrath, and Liam Brady were skilled enough to play beautiful technical football. Instead, Jack had them kicking long balls and chasing around like it was a Sunday League match. The tension exploded during the 1990 World Cup in Italy. Ireland played Egypt in a group stage match. The game was boring and scrappy. Ireland won, but the football was terrible to watch. Dunphy was commentating live on television, and his frustration boiled over. He threw his pen down in disgust while the cameras were rolling. He called Ireland's style agricultural, basically saying they played like farmers, not footballers. It was a brutal insult broadcast to the entire nation. Jack Charlton didn't take the criticism quietly. At a press conference soon after, Jack refused to even acknowledge Dunphy's questions. Then he looked directly at the cameras and called Dunphy a bitter little man. It was a direct personal attack. Jack made it clear he had no respect for Dunphy's opinion and no interest in defending his tactics to critics. The Irish public had to choose sides. On one hand, you had Dunphy, an intelligent analyst who wanted Ireland to play better football. On the other hand, you had Jack Charlton, who was actually winning games and taking Ireland to places they'd never been before. The public chose Jack overwhelmingly. Fans turned on Dunphy with shocking aggression. When Dunphy arrived at Dublin Airport after the World Cup, angry supporters actually tried to flip his car over. The hatred was real and dangerous. Liam Brady represented everything that critics like Dunphy loved. Brady was an artist with the football. He had played for Arsenal and Juventus, two of Europe's biggest clubs. He was known for skillful passing, creative midfield play, and technical excellence. He was the kind of player who made football look effortless and beautiful. But Jack Charlton had no use for that kind of player in his system. The clash between Brady and Charlton came to a head in 1989. Ireland was playing a friendly match against West Germany. Brady started the game, expecting to play the full 90 minutes like usual, but Jack had other ideas. Before half-time, Jack made the decision to substitute Brady off. Taking off a player before half-time is incredibly rare and deeply humiliating. It sends a clear message that the player has been so bad that the manager can't even wait until half-time to get him off the pitch. Brady was furious. He felt that Jack had discarded him like garbage. At half-time, the two men had a heated argument in the dressing room. Brady couldn't understand why Jack would embarrass him like that in front of his teammates and the crowd. Jack didn't care about Brady's feelings. He cared about playing his system his way. If Brady couldn't fit into that system, then Brady had to go. That was the end of Liam Brady's international career. He never played for Ireland again. He missed the magical journey of the 1990 World Cup, where Ireland reached the quarter-finals and the whole nation celebrated. Brady had to watch from home while Ireland achieved success using the very tactics he despised. It must have been incredibly painful for one of Ireland's most talented players to be cast aside so brutally. Jack's decision to get rid of Brady sent a clear message to every other player in the squad. It didn't matter how talented you were or what you'd achieved in your club career. If you didn't buy into Jack's philosophy completely, you were out. There was no room for discussion or compromise. Jack's way was the only way. Roy Keane was different from Liam Brady. Keane wasn't a technical artist. He was a tough, aggressive midfielder who loved to win. But Keane was also intelligent and demanded respect from his managers. He had played under Brian Clough at Nottingham Forest, one of the smartest managers in football history. Keane knew what good coaching looked like, and he didn't think Jack Charlton measured up. Keane later admitted that his relationship with Jack was virtually non-existent. He described Jack as being like a big, grumpy uncle. Keane thought Jack was cunning, but not particularly smart about football. Keane had learned from Brian Clough, who was astute and capable of detailed analysis. In Keane's view, merely blustered his way through. Jack's motto was, "Play it as I see it," meaning players had to follow his vision. Clough's motto was, "Play it as you see it," meaning players had freedom to make decisions. Keane knew which approach he preferred. The relationship between Keane and Charlton exploded in 1992 during a tournament in Boston. Keane and another player, Steve Staunton, had been drinking the night before a match. The next morning, they were late to the team bus. Jack was furious and berated both players in front of the team. Most players would have apologised and accepted the punishment. Roy Keane did not. Instead of apologising, Keane challenged Jack directly. He asked why Jack didn't just leave without them if they were late. He said he never asked Jack to wait for them. It was a bold, defiant response that questioned Jack's authority completely. Keane later claimed that Jack backed off immediately. Keane believed Jack was a bully who didn't like it when someone stood up to him. The confrontation showed that Jack's old-school approach to discipline didn't work on everyone. The situation got worse when team captain Mick McCarthy tried to defend Jack and calm things down. Keane turned on McCarthy and delivered a crude, angry response. The incident created bad blood between Keane and McCarthy that would last for years. A decade later, Keane and McCarthy would have an even bigger fight in Saipan before the 2002 World Cup, a fight that would end Keane's international career. The seeds of that disaster were planted back in Boston in 1992 under Jack Charlton's watch. After the Boston incident, Jack's management team forced Keane to participate in a press conference. The purpose was to show the media that everything was fine and there was no conflict within the team. Keane hated it. He felt he was being used in a charade to cover up the real problems. He resented having to pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Now here's where we need you to take action. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about football history and the real stories behind the legends. Hit that like button right now. Share this video with any football fans you know. And subscribe if you haven't already. We're bringing you the stories that other channels won't tell. Jack Charlton's time as Ireland's manager ended in January 1996. He had taken the team to incredible heights. At one point, Ireland was ranked 6th in the world by FIFA, an unthinkable achievement for such a small nation. He had beaten England, Italy, and Brazil. He had brought joy to millions of Irish people during tough economic times. The feuds that defined Jack's life came from the same personality traits that made him successful. He was loyal to his vision and refused to compromise. He didn't care about criticism or public opinion when he believed he was right. He valued results over relationships. These qualities helped him win trophies and change nations, but they also left him isolated and estranged from people who should have been closest to him. Looking back at Jack Charlton's life, we see a man of contradictions. He was a World Cup winner who feuded with his fellow World Cup winning brother for decades. He was Ireland's greatest manager who drove away some of Ireland's most talented players. He was beloved by millions, but despised by those who worked closest with him. He achieved remarkable success while leaving a trail of broken relationships behind him. The tragedy of the Charlton brothers stands out above all other feuds. Two men who shared the greatest moment in English football history couldn't share a normal family relationship. They let pride and stubbornness destroy something precious. By the time they partially reconciled, it was almost too late. And then dementia took them both, a cruel final chapter that placed them on equal footing in suffering. Jack Charlton died in July 2020 at the age of 85. The outpouring of love from Ireland was enormous. Thousands of people shared memories of where they were when Ireland beat England, or reached the World Cup quarter-finals. They remembered the joy and pride Jack had given them. In death, Jack was remembered as a legend and a hero. But the complete story of Jack Charlton includes the feuds, the conflicts, and the people he hurt along the way. Bobby Charlton, forced to choose between his mother and his wife. Roy Keane, disrespected and forced into fake press conferences. Liam Brady, humiliated and discarded before his time. Eamon Dunphy, attacked for expressing honest opinions. These stories matter too. Jack Charlton was a giant of football who stood tall in 2 countries. He won the biggest prize in the sport and changed a nation's sporting culture forever. But he was also a man whose refusal to compromise cost him dearly in personal relationships. His legacy is both inspiring and cautionary. He shows us that you can achieve greatness and still leave wounds that never fully heal. Jack Charlton's life was extraordinary, complicated, and unforgettable. The feuds he fought were as much a part of his story as the trophies he won. Roy Keane, the born leader who drove Manchester United to 17 major trophies, 7 Premier League titles, 4 FA Cups, a Champions League crown. The midfielder Sir Alex Ferguson once called the best in the world of his generation. Yet, for all his success, nobody loved him. Because behind every trophy was a trail of broken relationships and battles that defined his legacy as much as any silverware. These weren't just tough opponents, they were the rivals who exposed the darkest side of Roy Keane's relentless intensity. Let's start with the most personal vendetta, Alf-Inge Haaland. This was pure, calculated revenge. September 1997. Manchester United versus Leeds United. With 5 minutes left, Keane lunged at Haaland inside the penalty box. Instead, he snapped his own cruciate ligament, a career-threatening injury that sidelined him for nearly a year. But as Keane writhed in agony, he believed Haaland mocked him, questioned whether the injury was even real. That perceived injustice consumed him. For 4 years, Keane carried that grudge like a weapon. April 2001, the Manchester derby at Old Trafford. Haaland now wore City's colours. In the 86th minute, Keane overran the ball. Haaland intercepted. What followed was one of the most horrific tackles in Premier League history. Keane launched himself knee-high, studs exposed, straight into Haaland's knee. Referee David Ellery didn't hesitate. Red card. But the real controversy came later. In his 2002 autobiography, published for financial gain, Keane confessed everything. He admitted the foul was executed to settle an old score. He claimed he never went out to deliberately injure players, but he did go out to hurt them. The distinction was meaningless. The Football Association saw it for what it was: premeditated revenge, documented in print for profit. They extended his suspension by 5 games and slapped him with a massive £150,000 fine. There's a myth that Keane's tackle ended Haaland's career. Haaland clarified he'd been playing with a pre-existing injury to his left knee, while Keane had actually kicked his right thigh. But the damage to Keane's reputation was done. He'd admitted malicious intent in writing, transforming a brutal tackle into a documented act of revenge. Now, if you're shocked by Keane's calculated revenge, imagine what else he's capable of. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which of Keane's feuds you think went too far, because we're just getting started. From personal vendettas, we move to institutional warfare, Mick McCarthy and the Saipan incident. This was Roy Keane declaring war on the chronic mediocrity of the Football Association of Ireland. May 2002. Ireland's World Cup squad gathered in Saipan for pre-tournament preparation. The FAI delegation viewed it as rest and recreation. Keane, who told Ferguson he was going to the World Cup to win it, saw it as crucial preparation time. What he found was substandard facilities and poor organisation. Keane's frustration boiled over. On May 22nd, he initially decided to go home, then retracted that decision, but the tension was irreversible. An explosive team meeting followed where Keane launched a scathing attack on the FAI's planning. He directly challenged McCarthy's leadership. Despite intervention from media figures and even Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, the conflict proved irreconcilable. McCarthy sent Keane home on the eve of the World Cup. The fallout was seismic. Ireland split into Team Roy or Team Mick. Ireland, without their captain, reached the second round before losing to Spain on penalties. But here's the twist. Keane was eventually proven right. The FAI commissioned the Genesis report. The report agreed with Keane's criticisms, concluding the FAI structure was not conducive to good planning. So Keane was correct, but his confrontational approach limited his capacity to effect change. Despite the damning report, the FAI resisted reform. Keane exposed institutional failure, but his aggressive style meant he couldn't stick around to fix it. But the biggest fracture wasn't with a rival or federation. It was with the man who'd built him into a legend, Sir Alex Ferguson. For over a decade, Keane served as the ideal extension of Ferguson's will, the born leader who demanded elite performance. But as Keane aged and struggled with injuries, the dynamic deteriorated. Ferguson became concerned that Keane's high standards were morphing into disruptive bullying. November 2005, Manchester United suffered a humiliating 4-1 defeat to Middlesbrough. Afterward, Keane conducted an interview with MUTV that would never air. In it, he brutally criticised teammates. He called Kieran Richardson a lazy defender. He questioned why people in Scotland rave about Darren Fletcher. He challenged Rio Ferdinand's arrogance, stating just because you're paid £120,000 a week and play well for 20 minutes, you think you're a superstar. The ensuing training ground confrontation sealed his fate. Assistant manager Carlos Queiroz challenged Keane using the word loyalty. Keane exploded. "Don't you talk to me about loyalty, Carlos. You left this club after 12 months. When Ferguson intervened, Keane turned on him. You as well, Gaffer. We need more from you. We're slipping behind other teams." This challenge to Ferguson's authority made Keane's exit inevitable. Ferguson acted with ruthless decisiveness. A final meeting followed. Ferguson confirmed the end by tearing up Keane's contract. Keane later admitted the realisation made him cry, acknowledging that all respect between them had vanished. He attempted to reconcile, but later expressed regret for even trying. Ferguson saw it differently. By attacking young assets like Ferdinand, Keane threatened dressing room stability. Removing the ageing captain was necessary. This conflict remains intensely bitter, fueled by attacks in their autobiographies. Keane's grievance is rooted in Ferguson's post-career criticism. Then there was Alan Shearer, an immediate collision of two uncompromising personalities. September 2001, Manchester United travelled to St James's Park and lost 4-3 to Newcastle. Near the end, Keane lost control. He was booked for throwing the ball at Shearer. When Shearer failed to react as angrily as Keane desired, he escalated. He pushed Shearer, then appeared to swing a punch. Referee Steve Bennett dismissed him, but the chaos didn't end there. Shearer later admitted he deliberately antagonised Keane, luring him into the sending off. At the final whistle, Shearer knew Keane would be waiting. Shearer recalled looking up to see Keane standing at the top of the stairs, steam pouring out of his ears. The confrontation involved shouting and attempts at physical altercations, only prevented by others stepping in. This revealed a fundamental weakness. His volatile temperament was tactically exploitable. Astute opponents like Shearer knew exactly how to bait him into self-destructive acts. Finally, Patrick Vieira, the rivalry that defined the Premier League era. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Arsenal or Manchester United won the league title in all but one season. This amplified the conflict between the two captains. The animosity was palpable. Keane clashed with Vieira after barging Mark Overmars. Later at Old Trafford, Keane tugged Vieira's shirt and kicked out. Vieira retaliated by swinging a punch that missed. The most iconic moment came in February 2005 in the Highbury Tunnel. Moments before kickoff, Keane initiated a highly aggressive verbal exchange with Vieira. His intent was psychological domination. By targeting the opposing captain before the match, Keane sought to establish intimidation. Manchester United won 4-2. Despite the bitterness, both players later confessed they relished their battles. Vieira reflected he knew it would be a fight in every game, adding he loved the way Keane was on the field with massive respect. This transformation demonstrates the feud was about professional dominance rather than personal hatred. But here's the reality. In their 12 Premier League encounters, Manchester United secured 4 victories, lost 3 and drew 5. The statistical advantage was razor-thin. The focus on psychological victories often overshadows how marginal Keane's superiority truly was. Before we wrap up, think about this. Keane's conflicts defined him as much as his trophies. Drop a comment telling me if his intensity was worth the destruction, and subscribe for more football stories. Roy Keane jointly holds the record for most red cards in English football. 13 dismissals, a testament to his difficulty managing the intensity that made him effective. His management transition proved this. He initially flourished at Sunderland, leading them to the Championship title, but at Ipswich Town, his limitations became apparent. Yet Keane found his perfect role. Punditry allows him to channel his characteristics without implementing them in a dressing room. He's compensated for the very traits that made his relationships untenable. The paradox is inescapable. His success was inseparable from his capacity for explosive conflict. His rivalries weren't flaws, but authentic manifestations of his leadership. A consistent thread emerges, an uncompromising demand for standards, and a willingness to utilize aggression. These weren't just tough players, they were men who revealed the true cost of his drive. Haaland suffered a revenge tackle that earned Keane the biggest fine for admitted malicious intent. McCarthy watched his captain walk away from a World Cup. Ferguson had to tear up his contract when Keane's standards became disruptive. Shearer exposed how easily Keane's rage could be weaponized, and Vieira showed the actual dominance was more marginal than mythology suggests. Keane's legacy is profound excellence carrying collateral damage. He refused to compartmentalize his aggression. The 17 trophies stand as testament to what his intensity achieved, but the burnt relationships, the red cards, the explosive exits, the admitted revenge, and the failed management spells reveal what it cost. Roy Keane was a born leader who drove his teams to glory, but nobody loved him because the same fire that forged champions also burned everything in its path. His defining battles became as memorable as his victories, cementing his status as football's most uncompromising figure.
Let's tell you what's a piece of banana. Good luck. I'll tell you, I would love it if Keegan just said that. And Keegan's got taps off.
Like he said about Leeds, and when you do things like that about a man like Stuart Pearce, I've kept really quiet, but I'll tell you something, he went down in my estimation when he said that. We have not...
A football icon who won the European Cup and became European Footballer of the Year twice. But his professional life was defined by something else entirely. Intense, explosive confrontations that often ended in sudden, dramatic exits. These weren't just disagreements. They were physical fights, psychological battles, and legal wars over professional ethics. Today, we're diving into 5 of Kevin Keegan's most defining rivalries, conflicts that shaped his entire career and revealed the true nature of a man who could never compromise his beliefs. Let's start with the moment that showed everyone just how raw and impulsive he could be. The 1974 FA Charity Shield at Wembley. Liverpool versus Leeds. Keegan versus Billy Bremner. This wasn't just a football match. It was a war. The rivalry between Liverpool and Leeds was already legendary by this point. Both teams represented different philosophies of English football. Liverpool's flowing passing game against Leeds' physical, uncompromising approach. Bremner embodied everything about Leeds' aggressive style. He was their captain, their enforcer, their heart. And on that August afternoon, he had one target in mind, Kevin Keegan. Bremner had been targeting Keegan all afternoon with brutal physical challenges, kicking him repeatedly, pushing every button he could find. The provocation was relentless and calculated. Bremner knew exactly what he was doing. He was testing Keegan's limits, seeing how much the Liverpool star could endure before breaking. There's only so much anyone can take. Eventually, Keegan snapped. Both players were sent off by the referee in the 60th minute, but Keegan's reaction to the dismissal revealed everything about his character. He ripped his shirt off and threw it to the ground in pure rage. Bremner did the same. It was an unprecedented display of defiance and fury at Wembley, the home of English football. The symbolism was powerful. Two of the game's biggest names rejecting authority in the most public way possible. This public meltdown led to serious consequences. Both players received an 11-game suspension and a £500 fine each. These punishments were incredibly harsh for that era. Some in football doubted whether the FA Disciplinary Committee even had the competence to hand down such severe sanctions. But the FA was cracking down on rising violence in football, and they needed examples. Keegan and Bremner, two high-profile stars, became those examples. Fame wouldn't protect them. The message was clear. On-field violence would no longer be tolerated, regardless of reputation or status. This early incident set a pattern. Keegan reacting impulsively to what he saw as injustice, losing control in explosive, visible ways. A pattern that would haunt him throughout his managerial career. The Bremner clash demonstrated Keegan's low tolerance for sustained physical provocation and his inability to maintain composure when pushed beyond his limits. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us which football manager you think has the best composure under pressure. Now, back to the story. 3 years later, in 1977, another conflict emerged. This time with teammate Jimmy Case. There's a famous rumour that still circulates today. The story goes that Keegan's transfer to Hamburg was triggered by a punch-up with Case after the FA Cup final, leaving Keegan with a black eye. It's dramatic, it's sensational, it's completely false. Jimmy Case himself denied the whole thing. He said it was just a rumour that started on the number 86 bus to Penny Lane. The idea that he punched Keegan before the European Cup final was based on what others thought he might do, not reality. Case's reputation as a hard man meant people assumed he'd react violently to any perceived slight, but the reality was far more mundane. So what actually happened? The morning after Liverpool won the European Cup final in Rome, Keegan did get a black eye. But it wasn't from a punch. It was an accident during playful roughhousing near the hotel pool. Phil Neal's elbow caught him by mistake. Nothing sinister at all. The Liverpool players were celebrating their greatest triumph, letting off steam after the intense pressure of the final. In the chaos and excitement of that celebration, accidents happen. The truth about Keegan's transfer is even simpler. He'd made a deal with Liverpool chairman John Smith a full year earlier. The agreement was clear. The 1976-77 season would be his last at Anfield, and the club would sell him for a fixed fee of £500,000. He'd already confirmed his departure and even celebrated it in the early hours of May 26, 1977, after winning the European Cup. The transfer to Hamburg was a carefully planned professional move, not an impulsive escape from conflict. Keegan wanted a new challenge. He wanted to prove himself in a different league, a different country, a different football culture. The punch-up myth persisted because the media preferred a dramatic personal feud over a simple professional decision. The public wanted conflict. They wanted betrayal. The truth was boring by comparison. This shows how Keegan's high-profile persona often shaped public narratives more than actual facts. His celebrity status meant every decision was scrutinised and often sensationalised. Liverpool moved on quickly anyway. When Keegan returned to Anfield later that year with Hamburg, Liverpool demolished them 6-0 in the European Super Cup. Case even got an assist in that thrashing. The message was clear. Liverpool didn't need Kevin Keegan. They had Kenny Dalglish now. Now we move to the conflict that defined Keegan's managerial career. His rivalry with Manchester United boss Sir Alex Ferguson during the 1995-96 Premier League title race. Keegan's Newcastle team played beautiful attacking football. His philosophy was simple: you score 3 and we'll score 4. It was entertaining, exciting and incredibly naive at the highest level. Newcastle had been clear leaders for a while. Their swashbuckling style had captured the imagination of the entire country. But Manchester United were mounting a comeback. They had experience, ruthlessness, and most importantly, they had Sir Alex Ferguson. Ferguson was a master of psychological warfare. He knew exactly how to get into opponents' heads. He'd done it countless times before, applying pressure through the media, questioning referees, undermining rivals. The specific mind game that broke Keegan targeted the integrity of opposing teams, especially Leeds United. After a tough match, Ferguson publicly questioned the commitment of Leeds players. He suggested they didn't try as hard against other top teams as they did against Manchester United. Ferguson's exact words were brutal. He said he couldn't understand the Leeds players. He fully supported their manager, who didn't deserve players like that. If they'd played like that all season, they'd be near the top. They only raised their game because they were playing Manchester United. It was pathetic. Keegan saw this comment as a direct attack on Newcastle. Ferguson was implying that weaker teams would intentionally put in less effort when playing Newcastle compared to when they played the league leaders. This undermined the legitimacy of Newcastle's victories and their entire title challenge. It suggested Newcastle's position was built on luck and favourable treatment rather than merit. For Keegan, who believed absolutely in the fairness of competition, this was intolerable. Ferguson's strategy was brilliant because it targeted Keegan's core weakness, his passionate, absolute belief in the fairness and integrity of the competition. Ferguson had successfully replaced physical provocation with verbal and ethical provocation. Keegan's response was just as explosive as his reaction to Bremner 2 decades earlier. He still couldn't restrain his immediate emotional defence, even with a title on the line. The outburst happened live on television after Newcastle's hard-fought victory over Leeds United. Keegan's famous tirade, "I will love it if we beat them. Love it." It was a moment of pure, unfiltered emotional release. His face was red, his voice shaking with emotion. He was a man on the edge, publicly unravelling under the pressure. The consequences were immediate and devastating. The highly publicised rant confirmed to Ferguson that he'd successfully broken his rival. Newcastle's team and manager were distracted during the crucial final fixtures. The psychological damage was done. Manchester United won their remaining games comfortably. Newcastle drew their last 2 matches. They finished 4 points behind United. The title was lost. Ferguson had used the pressure of the title race to shatter Keegan's control. It proved the power of psychological strategy over raw emotional passion in modern football. Keegan's honesty and emotion, traits that made him beloved by fans, became his greatest vulnerability against a calculating opponent. Fast forward to 2008, Keegan's second spell as Newcastle manager. This conflict was different. It moved beyond emotion and sporting rivalry into a battle over managerial professional integrity. Dennis Wise had been appointed executive director of football by owner Mike Ashley. Though Keegan initially expressed confidence about working with Wise, tension over player recruitment emerged immediately. The new structure represented everything wrong with modern football: owners and executives making football decisions without proper football knowledge. The dispute centred entirely on one player, Uruguayan midfielder Ignacio Gonzalez. Wise urged Keegan to sign him. Keegan found no substantial professional reference to the player online. The details of his prior loan at Monaco were unimpressive. Then the club's actions became truly disrespectful. Wise told Keegan to search for the player on YouTube. The only clips Keegan found were poor quality videos that provided no proper basis for signing a player to a Premier League club. Even more shocking, no one at the club had ever actually seen the player play, not one person. This was professional negligence on a staggering scale. Despite Keegan making his very strong objections clear to Wise, Vice President Tony Jimenez, and owner Mike Ashley, the club went ahead anyway. They signed Gonzalez on loan on August 31st, 2008. The club's justification was astonishing. They called it a commercial deal. The loan was a favour to 2 influential South American agents who would then look favourably on the club in the future. This transaction cost the club nearly £1 million in wages for a player not expected to play for the first team. It provided rare, concrete evidence of non-footballing interests dictating Premier League transfer policy. The grimmest whisperings about how football really works were suddenly exposed. For Keegan, this was a fundamental violation of his contract and his professional mandate. Signing a player based on poor quality video footage to satisfy a commercial interest against his strong professional objection crossed every line. He resigned immediately on principle. Keegan then lodged a claim for constructive dismissal. In October 2009, an independent arbitration panel found unequivocally in his favour. He was constructively dismissed by Newcastle United. The panel declared that removing control of transfer policy from Keegan and handing it to Dennis Wise constituted constructive dismissal. The club's counterclaim for breach of contract was rejected. Keegan was awarded £2 million plus interest. But the real significance was the legal precedent. The panel ruled that even when not explicitly written in a manager's contract, managers have the right to a final say on transfers. This validated Keegan's stand completely. The traditional authority of the manager over first-team recruitment was now an implied contractual right that couldn't be stripped away and given to a director of football. This decision had massive ramifications for English football, particularly clubs employing a director of football. It legally solidified the manager's primacy in technical matters. Unlike the emotional rage against Bremner or the psychological collapse against Ferguson, the Wise dispute was fought and won through steadfast legal defence of professional ethics. But not all of Keegan's conflicts ended in vindication. His most painful personal rift involved Alan Shearer, the striker he'd signed for a world record £15 million in July 1996. Keegan persuaded Shearer to join his hometown club despite interest from Manchester United. The partnership started with huge mutual ambition, but just 6 months later, Keegan abruptly resigned from his 10-year contract in January 1997. He said he'd taken the club as far as he could. This sudden departure, caused by his inability to manage the intense prolonged pressure of the title challenge, was seen as betrayal. Those closest to Shearer felt deeply let down. The manager had abandoned the project so soon after Shearer had committed his entire career to Keegan's vision. The personal strain intensified almost a decade later. Keegan failed to attend Shearer's testimonial match against Celtic in May 2006. Keegan was on a family holiday in the United States and chose not to fly back. While Shearer never publicly criticised him, he privately admitted disappointment. The man who paid a world record fee to sign him didn't attend one of the most emotional and significant nights of his professional life. He didn't even contribute a tribute to the match programme. Keegan defended his decision on rational grounds. He argued he wouldn't have expected Shearer to fly across the Atlantic for his own testimonial. This revealed a blind spot in Keegan's personal management, a failure to grasp the symbolic and emotional importance of such gestures. When Keegan returned to Newcastle in 2008, he attempted reconciliation. Shearer ultimately declined a coaching role. He stated explicitly that there was only room for one strong personality at the club. They were too similar, both opinionated and single-minded. The personal friction had evolved into irreconcilable professional incompatibility. The rift that started with Keegan's impulsive 1997 walkout and worsened with the 2006 snub could never be repaired. Kevin Keegan's career was defined by his unyielding commitment to passion and principle. These 5 conflicts trace a clear pattern: physical, impulsive rage against Bremner that led to severe punishment, a fabricated myth with Case that showed how media narratives could overshadow truth, an emotional televised collapse against Ferguson where psychological warfare cost him a title, a painful personal estrangement from Shearer caused by impulsive professional abandonment, and finally, a principled legal battle against Wise that resulted in landmark vindication. His volatility cost him dearly, the 1996 title, his relationship with Shearer, but that same character also secured a vital legal victory that reshaped English football. The 2009 arbitration ruling affirmed managers possess an implied contractual right to final say on transfers. It imposed limits on the director of football role and provided critical leverage to managers against powerful, non-footballing executives. Kevin Keegan's professional life was a series of volatile clashes driven by principle. While this led to painful losses, it was also the source of moral strength that cemented his legacy. Not just as King Kev, the footballing legend, but as an uncompromising defender of managerial professional integrity. His core principles were both his greatest weakness and his greatest strength. If you enjoyed this deep dive into football's most explosive manager, smash that like button and let us know in the comments which football rivalry you want us to cover next.
Arsenal said their goalkeeper had been fouled before Terry Cooper cracked the ball home.
Division club to Wembley, and I mean 30,000 supporters up there, and to actually go win 3-0 and everything come right on the day for you.
He could do so much with the ball that you know, defending was not a problem.
Some very sad football news now, and Leeds have announced the death of club legend Terry Cooper at the age of 77.
In 2021, football lost Terry Cooper. He was a revolutionary left-back whose attacking runs were years ahead of his time. At his peak in the 1970 World Cup, Pelé himself said Cooper was good enough to play for Brazil's legendary winning team. That is the highest praise any player can receive. But behind this skilled player was a dark reputation. Cooper was part of the team known as Dirty Leeds. This squad was famous for brutal cynicism and perfecting the dark arts of English football. They used persistent fouling, time wasting, and deliberately targeting opposition players. The most damning evidence comes from Manchester United legend George Best. He recalled a team talk where Sir Matt Busby went through the Leeds lineup, calling each player a dirty player. When Busby got to Cooper, he called him an even dirtier player than his already notorious teammates. This was not just media talk. It was a specific charge from one of football's most respected managers. Cooper was a paradox. He was an elegant attacker, but also a hardened enforcer. His pioneering attacking role naturally thrust him into more confrontational situations than a traditional defender. By bombing up the pitch, he was not merely defending against a winger, he was directly challenging opposition fullbacks, midfielders, and forwards across the length of the field, making him a lightning rod for conflict. This is the story of the 4 opponents who faced that brutal reality. Was this nickname fair, or just what winning required back then? Comment below with your opinion and subscribe for more deep dives into football's biggest controversies. George Best was Cooper's most mercurial opponent. The rivalry between Leeds United and Manchester United was the modern version of the War of the Roses, the ancient conflict between Yorkshire and Lancashire. This deep historical hatred, combined with industrial rivalry, made matches between these clubs incredibly violent and tribal. During the 1970s, at the height of football hooliganism, clashes between the club's respective firms, the Leeds United service crew and Manchester United's Red Army, were notoriously violent. Best himself admitted he hated playing against Leeds. He called them a bloody nightmare despite acknowledging their immense skill. The accusation from Busby was not generic. It was a calculated observation. By singling out both fullbacks, Busby revealed a deliberate strategy by Leeds manager Don Revie. The plan was to stop creative geniuses like Best at the source on the flanks before they could cause damage in central areas. Cooper was not just a participant in this physical approach, he was a specialist executioner of this strategy. Photographs often show Best being swarmed by multiple Leeds players at once. Cooper, Billy Bremner, and Norman Hunter formed a white-shirted cage around him. The epic 1970 FA Cup semi-final required 3 exhausting matches to separate the sides. Leeds eventually won 1-0 in the second replay. This was a prime example of their attritional physical strategy in action. Busby label, relayed by a global superstar in Best, cemented Cooper's reputation among players and officials. This created a self-perpetuating cycle. The reputation preceded him into every match, potentially influencing referees and provoking opponents. Cooper had to play with the weight of that perception, perhaps even increasing his aggression to maintain a psychological edge. This psychological warfare was as much a part of the game as the physical battles on the pitch. Every time Cooper stepped onto the field against Manchester United, he carried the burden of Busby's damning words, a reputation that followed him like a shadow. The rivalry between Leeds and Chelsea in the late 1960s and early 1970s was one of English football's most bitter and violent. It was fueled by geography, culture, and on-field hatred. The media framed it as Yorkshire grit versus flash Cockney, the industrial north against fashionable London. The animosity was cemented through brutal matches in preceding years. Chelsea striker Ian Hutchinson said plainly that they hated Leeds, and Leeds hated them. Chelsea goalkeeper Peter Bonetti acknowledged that Leeds had a reputation for being dirty, and Chelsea had to match them physically. just to survive. This was not a rivalry built on mutual respect. It was built on genuine loathing, the kind that made every tackle more vicious and every challenge more personal. The 1970 FA Cup final at Wembley was the peak of this rivalry. The pitch, ravaged by the Horse of the Year show, was in terrible condition. Cooper himself said you needed hooves to play on it. The game was chaotic and ended 2-2, with both teams surrendering leads. The match was defined by its physicality. Journalist Hugh McIlvanney famously wrote that the referee would give a free kick only on production of a death certificate. This was not hyperbole. It was an accurate assessment of how the game was allowed to descend into barely controlled violence. If the Wembley final was a war, the replay at Old Trafford was its bloodiest battle. It is still regarded as one of the most violent matches in the sport's history. Modern referees, upon reviewing the footage, suggested they would have issued between 6 and 11 red cards under today's rules. The match was a catalogue of cynical and dangerous challenges. Ron Chopper Harris made an infamous high tackle on Eddie Gray's knee. Leeds striker Mick Jones clattered into goalkeeper Peter Bonetti. Norman Hunter traded punches with Ian Hutchinson. This was football at its most brutal. A contest where survival was as important as victory. Within this chaos, the confrontation between Cooper and Chelsea's striker Peter Osgood was crucial. Photographic evidence captures the intensity of their duel, showing Osgood beating Cooper in the air or to a loose ball. The decisive moment came in the 78th minute when Osgood scored Chelsea's equaliser with a magnificent diving header. As the left-back, Cooper was a key figure in the defensive unit responsible for preventing the cross and marking the space that Osgood brilliantly exploited. Osgood's goal was a direct, successful assault on Cooper's defensive territory. The duel was not born of a specific personal feud, but was a representation of the philosophical clash between the two teams. Osgood, the king of Stamford Bridge, represented Chelsea's flair and swagger. Cooper represented Leeds' combination of skill and uncompromising aggression. In a game defined by physical violence, Osgood's moment of supreme skill was the ultimate confrontational act. It negated all of Leeds' physical intimidation and demonstrated that technical brilliance could triumph over brute force. For Cooper and the Leeds defence, this was the most significant loss of the battle. Their physical dominance had been rendered irrelevant, and Chelsea went on to win the cup in extra time. It was a devastating defeat, one that showed the limits of intimidation when faced with true quality. The confrontation with Manchester City's Francis Lee represented a different kind of conflict. It was a battle that moved beyond overt physical warfare into the more subtle but equally antagonistic realm of gamesmanship. While the rivalry with Manchester City was not as historically deep as those with Chelsea or Manchester United, their matches were high-stakes encounters between two Premier teams. The two clubs contested the 1969 Charity Shield, which Leeds won 2-1. Lee was a formidable opponent, but he was most renowned for his ability to win penalties, a trait that earned him both success and notoriety. A league match at Main Road during the 1969-70 season provides the central example of this unique confrontation. On a treacherous, icy pitch, Manchester City secured a 2-1 victory. The decisive moment came when a cross was, according to one report, harshly judged to have been handled by Cooper inside the penalty area. Francis Lee converted the resulting penalty. This incident was a direct, game-altering confrontation where the battle was fought not just with boots, but with reputations. The description of the decision as harshly judged points to the controversy that often surrounded Lee. This moment was a clash of two powerful, opposing reputations, placing the referee in an almost impossible position. On one side was Cooper, the enforcer from dirty Leeds with a well-earned reputation for aggression. On the other was Lee, the striker with a reputation for going to ground easily. The referee's decision was likely influenced by this psychological battle, where each player's history became a weapon to sway the official. Was it a clear handball, or was the referee influenced by Lee's appeal and Cooper's aggressive posture? This duel highlights a different facet of negative play, moving beyond the brutal tackle to include simulation and pressuring the referee. In his own way, Lee's style was as cynical as Leeds's, just expressed through different means. Cooper's physical confrontation with Lee was therefore a meeting of two distinct schools of football's dark arts. The dynamic was further complicated by the fact that both Cooper and Lee were England teammates, part of Sir Alf Ramsey's 1990 World Cup squad, adding a layer of professional familiarity to their intense club-level antagonism. They wore the same national shirt but battled like enemies when their club colours were on the line. The rivalry with Alan Ball redefines confrontation. This was not a conflict born of visceral hatred or gamesmanship, but of a relentless, high-stakes battle of will, stamina, and nerve between two of the era's most fiercely competitive individuals. It was a war of attrition fought for English football's biggest prizes. The first significant confrontation occurred in the 1968 League Cup final, when Ball was the midfield engine for Arsenal. In what was widely reported as a drab and dull game, Leeds secured a hard-fought 1-0 victory to claim their first major trophy under Don Revie. The match's solitary, decisive goal was a powerful volley from Terry Cooper following a corner. For a defender to score the winner at Wembley against a team containing a World Cup winner like Ball was a direct, definitive act of confrontation on the biggest stage. The match was also a typically ill-tempered affair, with brawls erupting between players. This goal was more than just a rare strike. It was a statement of intent. It was an act of defiance against stereotypes, proving that Leeds had the skill and nerve to match their renowned steel. The rivalry intensified when Ball moved to Everton, who quickly became Leeds' primary challengers for the league title. Clashes between the two clubs were described as titanic battles. In the 1968-69 season, Leeds won the league title, their first in history. The following year, the roles were reversed as Everton claimed the championship, finishing 9 points clear of runners-up Leeds. These were not just matches. They were defining moments in English football history, contests that determined which team would be remembered as champions. The context for these meetings was consistently hostile. An FA Cup semi-final between the clubs in 1968, which Everton won, was described as a fiery encounter and a brutal clash. Although Ball was suspended for that particular match, it illustrates the violent backdrop against which their title duels were fought. The direct on-field confrontation between Cooper, the marauding left-back, and Ball, the tenacious, all-action midfielder with a phenomenal work rate, would have been a supreme test of fitness and will. Ball was relentless, never stopping, always pressing, always demanding more from himself and his teammates. Cooper had to match that intensity while also fulfilling his attacking responsibilities. Every run forward was met with Ball tracking back. Every defensive stand was challenged by Ball's tireless energy. It was a battle of two complete players, each refusing to give an inch. This rivalry was perhaps the purest form of professional confrontation. It was not defined by cultural animosity or personal insults, but by two world-class competitors, repeatedly locking horns when the stakes were at their absolute highest. Their subsequent careers, which saw them replace one another as manager of Exeter City, suggest a professional respect rather than a bitter personal feud. Theirs was the ultimate sporting contest, a sustained battle for supremacy, where every match could define a season and a career. The legacy of Terry Cooper is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of both sublime skill and uncompromising aggression. To analyse him through the lens of his toughest opponents is to see that his greatness was forged in the crucible of four distinct types of conflict, each demanding a different aspect of his character and ability. He was far more than a one-dimensional hardman. He was a master of confrontation in all its forms. Against Peter Osgood and Chelsea, he was a soldier in total war, a systemic cultural conflict where his individual duel was but one front in a much larger battle. Facing George Best, he became an instrument of targeted intimidation, the designated enforcer tasked with executing a cynical but brutally effective team strategy to cage a unique talent. In his duels with Francis Lee, he engaged in psychological gamesmanship, a battle of wits and competing reputations where the referee was the ultimate arbiter. Finally, against Alan Ball, he fought a war of professional attrition, a sustained, high-stakes contest of will and stamina for the sport's highest honours. To understand Terry Cooper is to understand the era in which he excelled. His revolutionary attacking play made him a legend and an innovator. Converted from a left winger who lacked top-end pace, Cooper found that the full-back position where he faced the play allowed his shrewd football brain and sublime skill to flourish. His devastating creating overlapping runs and partnership with winger Eddie Gray became a trademark of Don Revie's all-conquering Leeds United, key tactical innovation that helped the club shed its reputation as a merely dour side. But it was his capacity to navigate and thrive in these intensely confrontational environments that proved his true mettle. The dual identity of elegant innovator and hardened enforcer was not a contradiction. It was the perfect embodiment of the Revie philosophy to win with skill where possible, but to win by any means necessary. Cooper's attacking forays were a primary weapon, but his defensive aggression was an essential tool for survival and dominance in the unforgiving environment of English football's top flight. His career was tragically cut short by a severe leg break in April 1972, an injury from which he never truly recovered his world-class form. His legacy is complex, defined by both brilliance and brutality. He was an innovator whose career perfectly mirrors Don Revie's legendary and controversial Leeds United side. He was formidable and unforgettable. What is your final verdict on Cooper and his Dirty Leeds team? Subscribe for the next video.